Welcome to Chapter 2. Your body is done, you're ready to go, and now it's time to set this guitar up. There's a couple things that I like to do about when I'm in this step to just sort of make sure I got everything lined up, because there's a little bit of room, there's some margin for error, human error, and I make them all the time. So if you go in this order, I think that's going to really help you just get the guitar set up the best you can, and then worry about doing the electronics and the wiring later. So check it out. I explain it as I go. This is how you assemble it. I ran into some problems and I solved them. You will probably run into problems too, and you may or may not be able to solve them in this same way. And if you really get stuck, just email me, tim@newperspectivemusic.com. I'll help you out the best I can. I want this to be successful for everyone, you know? So I'm using this piece of hollow core door veneer to make my pickguard cover. I'm going to go way outside the line, of course. Oh, that's pretty close. If I were a little more careful, I could get a better fit. And I could also get a better fit, of course, if I used any tool other than a razor blade and a piece of sandpaper. Like if I used the bandsaw or the scroll saw, I could make that fit better. So I'm going to clean this up a little bit, and that's good enough for me for this. All right, it is the next day. My tung oil has dried enough for me to finish this. This is, again, I'm kind of rushing for this video. You know, obviously you're going to probably want to put a little more time and effort into the fit and finish of this. And but so I've got my finishes dry, I've got all my parts made, I've got my headstock is cut and ready to go. I'm going to move this over to my other little bench I have over here, and it's time to assemble. I have my laser cutter running over there, which is a little bit noisy, so I'm going to do a voiceover on this next part. We're going to start by just doing some of the really simple and easy assembly. First, the tuning pegs. First, the holes that were drilled into the headstock are 25/64 inch or 10 millimeters. I don't know why anybody wants to use the metric system. It's just so easy to say 25/64. It rolls right off your tongue. And they just go right in those holes and get tightened in there with the top collar. There's a washer in the collar, and it's a 10 millimeter nut. Now, I have these really cool sockets that are extra deep, and so that's what I'm using to tighten it, but you might need to use a wrench. Your socket might not fit over the end. That's showing you the 10 millimeter tool. So I tighten them just as tight as I can get them by holding that, which is not super tight because it doesn't have the leverage of the handle, and that way it just tightens them enough to where I can still move them around, can line them up the way I want, and then I just pre-drill a pilot hole for my little tiny screws that are going to hold those in place. Once I get those screws in, then I'll go and tighten up the top, and just be careful that your hole, make sure your hole's deep enough for the screw but doesn't go through the front, and also make sure you don't torque too hard on the screws because they do break real easy. The same thing for these strap holders. It's just a simple hole you drill, and there's a little piece of felt that goes between the guitar and the strap holder that comes with them. I want to make sure that when I put my 4 neck bolts in that they are attached to the neck. So I like to pick my spot looking in the hole so I don't like shoot and miss from the backside. I'm just drilling a little tiny pilot hole through the front, and then I can go in and through the back do what I need to do. I want to freeze it right here, and if you look to the left of the pocket, you can see how much of it is exposed and how little of it is actually a pocket. I probably should have left a little bit more wall there. That was something you might want to do just to make your neck sit in there a little bit tighter and better. Just another 1/2 inch. They sell these fancy expensive grommets that you can use to bolt your guitar necks on. They also sell these metal plates. They're kind of typical, but what I'm using is just these simple finish washers from the hardware store. Now I drill a hole into the body of the guitar big enough for the screw so it's not screwed into the wood, it just goes through, but then I drill a smaller hole into the neck for the screws to grab. You do want to check and make sure your screw isn't going to go through your neck depending on the thickness of the body. If it looks tight, get a shorter screw. It's really not a good idea to use an impact wrench here. You should use a handheld screwdriver and just do it the old-fashioned way, but I'm a bit of a cowboy sometimes. When I make my guitars, I want to shield this inner cavity electronics, and it helps keep some noise down. And so I use shielding tape, which is this copper, very thin copper that has an adhesive back, and you can stick it in there. and you can buy this at guitar, you know, luthier sites and whatnot, but it's expensive. You can also buy what's called slug tape, and they sell that at box stores. You might have to order it online for them. They don't always carry it, and it's supposed to, you put it in your garden and it kills slugs, and it's exactly the same stuff, but it is much less expensive because it's not for guitars, it's for slugs. Marketing. But you can also just use aluminum foil. Will work just as well. Some people say it doesn't, but I think it's fine. So in order to shield this cavity, just put some aluminum foil in there. Maybe a little neater than that. You'll notice that your two pots, if you buy the humbucker kit, you're going to get 500K pots, potentiometers, for your volume and tone knob. And if you buy the P90 kit, they're going to say 250K there. But you'll also notice that there's letters A and B at the beginning of those, and the A and B they're different types of pots. They actually blend a little bit differently. A is called an audio taper pot, and B is called a linear pot. And many times a lot of guitar makers and whatnot will just use all A's, just the way they blend back, but a lot of times they will use B for the tone because it has like a different sort of taper aspect to it that seems more pleasing to more musicians. So your kit's going to have one of each, so use the A for the volume and the B for the tone. Okay, one of these is specifically sized for the neck, and one of them is specifically sized for the bridge. And it is because the poles are just slightly closer together on the one that goes in the neck position. So if you can't tell which is which, you can measure. I got 2.278 on the outers here, and then this one here I have 2.164. So this is our neck position one because it's smaller, and this is our bridge position one. And I have to start with the neck one because it's going to get buried by the bridge one. That looks cool. I like these record humbucker rings that, you know, I like how the grain sort of blends and stuff. Traditionally the ring would be a little bit thicker. As you can see here, this would be the neck one actually, and then the bridge one would be even taller than this to help raise the pickup up so not as much of it sticks out of the trim. But since I'm doing this record thing, you're going to have to really screw these pickups up. We'll do all that in the setup later. If you don't like that, you can always use the traditional trim. You can buy these anywhere, and it should work just fine and cover the holes that we've created. I'm also not going to screw these down just yet. There will be at least 3 color wire in the kit. One of them is darker. I use all this reclaimed wire, of course, from pinball machines because that's what I do, and so I don't have necessarily like black, red, or whatever traditional colors you're used to seeing. But the way I do it is the dark color is always ground. So sometimes it's dark blue, sometimes it's black, sometimes it's gray, but whatever's dark is ground. So I'm going to take some of this ground wire and I'm going to put some right in this hole here that I run that's going to go underneath my bridge to ground my bridge to the guitar. You can see the hole has a slight slant to it. And this is just going to move around and wiggle in here on me. It could fall out, and I don't want it to fall out. I want to keep it still, so I'm just going to use a little bit of hot glue. Now let's get into the real meat of it. This is a pretty crucial step for making this like play and feel like a real guitar and sound right. We want to make sure we get our bridge in the right position because we have our whole string length thing to deal with. Now, our string length is 25.5 inches for this scale guitar, which means it's from the nut to the bridge where the string actually stops on the bridge and starts to vibrate. It needs to be 25.5 inches. You can do some micro adjustments by moving these back and forth to get that exactly right if you're a little
out of tune or wonky, but you want to kind of try and nail that. So right now you can see I have these are all pretty much in the middle of their place of travel. So that's a good spot to sort of aim for. That way I can adjust in either direction that I need to. And I'm going to throw some masking tape down over the guitar right now so I can make some markings here. My buddy over at SDM Custom came up with this little gadget, this tool that he made, which is pretty clever, but not necessary. But if you're doing a lot of guitars, you might want to do it. So basically what he has is he has two yardsticks connected together with these pivots, so we can put them on either side of the neck and we can adjust the width to the neck. Line it right up at the nut. So now we can just put this right over everything, and we can actually sort of draw lines to keep our center marks clearly visible. So now we know that these lines are centering our non-straight line. The other thing that's cool about this is if we line this ruler up right at our nut, right where the strings come over, we can see right here is where 25.5 inches is, and that's where we want our bridge to be centered. So our mechanisms are right there. So we've got our continuation of this line going down the body. If you don't have that gadget, you can just do it individually with one ruler on one side and then just take the yardstick and put it on the other side. But it's just a nice little trick. So now I'm going to draw this 25.5 inch line. Now remember, my pickups are still loose right now, and there's a reason for that, because we have some play. But you can see these two lines here are going to line up directly with the edge of this neck, so that's our trajectory. And then this line here, that's our 25.5 inches that we want to sort of line up our head. So now we can use these lines to center our bridge down the neck. So once we do that, we can use some type of micro measuring apparatus to check the outside lines and see if they're centered. But now here's another thing that I like to do, which might be completely unnecessary. I'm going to open my strings up, and I'm going to grab my high E string and my low E string, the ones that are going either side. And I'm actually going to string those up lightly in the guitar. Maybe I'll use a piece of tape to put them in the nut where they belong. Not here, and they're through the bridge here. So now I'm going to tug on that, and I'm going to back it up to where... Nice. Now I can pull that a little tight. And what I'm doing is I'm looking where the strings are sitting on the neck. So I can see I don't want it to be too close to the edge. The pickups have some motion in them. I can actually loosen them up right now. And I want to make sure that everything's going to line up properly. I can see that looks good there. That's good there. Right here I can see I like the distance, the spacing of the strings. I'm just doing it by eye. I don't want the string to be, I don't want to be like that. I don't want to be like that. I want to be right and centered down the neck. So I can see that all looks pretty good. I push back. I'm going to use my ice pick. I can see that my distance looks pretty good for my 25.5 inches and all that. The string spacing looks good, and I'm going to stick my ice pick right there. Do it again here. But so I'm going to take my 1/16 drill bit. There we go. I'll tighten it by hand. There we go. Now I'm sure I can look and see, and I'm still happy with my string spacing. I'm sure this is like a real amateur way to do this, and like real luthiers would be like, "What the heck? You should have all your measurements perfect before you even do that." But now I can just line it all up the way the guitar wants to be. The only problem is I got to pull this tape out from underneath here. There we go. So now there's enough tension on the strings to put them where they're going to stay. And I can line up my pole pieces on my pickups right underneath them, just the way I want them, because those pockets are just slightly oversized. Not all guitar headstocks are created equal. Some of them will slant down like this, so the strings will go over the nut and bend into them, and then they don't require any sort of back pressure behind the nut. And then other ones, like the one in your kit, are just kind of flat. They kind of go down a little bit and they're flat and they're parallel to the top of the guitar. And so these usually require some type of piece of metal or something to push down on the strings behind the nut to keep enough back pressure on the strings so they don't pop out of the nut while you're playing. Typically on like a Fender style guitar like this is, they'll have either like one or two of these little T things that go on there. But what I like to use is what's used, they're considered Floyd Rose style. And they are a full bar that actually goes across all 6 strings. And that way you just know that there's enough pressure on all the strings all the time. It just makes more sense to me than dancing around and putting a bunch of multiple things on. The outer strings that we have on here that we use for alignment go on the outside of the screws, and you can kind of just put this wherever you think looks cool. I always kind of like to do this little angle to it, and so I'm just sort of lining it up. And then I'm going to grab my ice pick. And here you can see how the string goes over the nut and then just gets pulled down a little bit to give us that back pressure. So now it's starting to get exciting and we're almost done. All we have left to do is to put the strings on the guitar and set it up and to wire it. Setting up the guitar can be time consuming and can be frustrating, and patience is key. So your bridge is going to come with this little Allen key, and if you have something better than a little Allen key, by all means feel free to use it. But so what this does is it adjusts the height of each individual saddle up and down, like so. We're going to put all 6 strings on and start getting this guitar under tension a little bit before we do any messing around. So we can adjust the height of the strings up and down, which will change the action by using this Allen key. Then with a screwdriver, we can adjust the distance back and forth to adjust the intonation to make that string length the exact 25.5 inches it needs to be for each fret. Okay? I'm actually kind of glad that this is going on right now. I just started stringing it up, and I have the bridge up pretty high. There's still a little more room for it to go up high, but you can see it's pretty far up its travel. My neck is about the same depth that it always is. Like, remember I said at the top that they're about an inch thick, and I went in 0.65, so I should have about 0.4, and that's about my usual height. But I'm fretting out here a little bit. So what I could do is I could continue to raise these up higher, but like I said, I'm getting kind of near the top of my travel. I don't want to necessarily be that high. We're getting closer now. The other thing I could do is I could take the entire guitar apart and I could route my pocket in a little deeper, and then that would give me some more room. And then there's another thing we can try, which is what I'm going to try first before I do that, and that is to change the angle of the neck going into the body. So the neck is going in pretty straight, but I'm just getting up a little bit high. I can shim underneath the neck here at the back of it with just a little, something like as thin as a piece of paper folded in half, or like a business card is something people use a lot. If I just put a little tiny bit of a shim right there, that will change the angle that this neck goes into the body, and it'll actually, so it'll bring this part of the neck up and bring this part of the neck down, which will bring all the action down and the entire thing down. So we're going to try that first, and if that doesn't work, then I'll pull the pickups out, pull the bridge off, put my template on, and route the pocket just a tiny bit deeper. First, I'm going to release the string tension. I'm very careful with my impact wrench. You should really not use an impact wrench doing this. I'm going to loosen my neck up. These, I'm just going to try loosening a little bit, whereas these, way out. Now we can see I can pull that out a little bit, and I can get a little bit of a gap in there, and I'm going to shove a business card in. And we're just going to cut a little piece of that off, a little narrower. And you'll be surprised how big of a difference a little tiny thin piece of paper can make in a guitar setup. You can see, you can't really even see that it's there, but I can see the difference here already. And you can see now it's starting to play without buzzing. Little random spot check. This one's still hitting a little bit. Let's raise that up. The ones in the middle usually have to go a little bit higher because the neck actually has a slight curve to it. I've bought several of these pre-made necks in varying degrees of finish and varying degrees of price. And the necks that I bulk ordered for this kit are my favorites because they're inexpensive. They're made of maple, which is a pretty sustainable wood. And they're usually pretty good to go out of the box. You don't have to do a lot of setup. If you're like a real expert guitar player, you might want to do some setups. And there might be some problems here and there, and we could potentially discuss those and see if we can get this on film. But if you can look down the neck, you can see this edge here. You want that to be pretty straight. Some people like to have a little bit of a bow in the middle. Some people like to have them perfectly flat. But what happens is this piece of wood, they machine it and they make it, you know, all perfectly flat and straight. But then you put it under tension of the strings, and the strings are pulling tight on each other, so they want to close in and sort of pull the whole guitar together like this. There's a metal rod. You can see the little hole right there that runs through the neck. That's called the truss rod. And you can use that rod with an Allen key, which is not provided in the kit. You also dig up your own to adjust the tension of the, so the rod will fight that, and you can straighten the neck out and bring this part up by turning it one way, and you can bring it down by turning it the other way. And you probably won't need to do any of that either. These are, like I said, they're usually pretty good, and they usually work without even adjusting the truss rod. Your strings will probably need to be stretched out a little bit. See, you have it tuned to pitch to E here. Now watch if I pull on it. It's flat. So you might want to give your strings a little stretch. Some of this stuff might be really basic knowledge. I'm trying to film this video with the idea that maybe this person, maybe you have never even played a guitar before. So careful with the lighter ones, they can snap real easy. Just give them a little tug. Using this little tuner that clips on the headstock of my guitar. So I play the string and it picks up the vibrations. These things are relatively inexpensive, but you do not need them. You can just use your iPhone. And there are free apps on iPhones, and I have a Google phone, that work better than the $100 pedals and fancy tuners you can buy. We still have a lot of, we haven't even tried playing this guitar yet, but just while I have it set up and I have the tuner on, I'll show you about intonation. So remember we said that this distance from here to here is 25.5 inches. The halfway point is the octave fret right here with the double dots, right? So if you put your finger lightly over this fret, guitarists know what this is called. It's called harmonics. If you don't know about guitar, it might take a little practice, but you put your finger over that harmonic. You can see it's vibrating and I have an E that's perfectly in tune. Now I should put my finger on that fret and it should be exactly the same note, E perfectly in tune. You see it's a little bit sharp. And so what that means I need to do is I need to make the string a little bit longer. I need to bring this bridge piece back this way, so I turn this screw tighter to move that back, and that will give me a little bit of a longer string and it should be in tune. So we'll do that real quick. I'm going to take a little pressure off. Put a screwdriver in there. And turn the screw to bring the bridge piece back a little bit. Now we'll got a perfectly in tune E, 12th fret harmonic, perfectly in tune, push the note down. Wow. Got A. A's pretty good out of the gate. D is very sharp, so that needs to go back. Still a little sharp. I've got this thing playing pretty nice right now. It feels really good. The action's nice and low. I can actually use my little depth gauge I have here. This is just a simple, like, $2 tool. I can put this little tool right on the frets and I can look at the depth of the string in random places, and I'm pretty consistent at about 1/32 to 2/32 all over the guitar, which is pretty good. That's about where I like to have it. But here you can see I have this one fret. There's no click there, and you can hear it. And then you see if I go up a little higher. See, I have a rock. So I'm going to mark this fret with a Sharpie so I don't forget which one it is. And I'm going to check around the rest of the neck while I'm at it and see what else I find. Now, of course, they make all sorts of specialty tools for leveling and crowning and filing these frets down. And I'm going to do this without any of them and do the best job I can with just some basic tools that you might have. The first thing I'm going to do, since I'm working on the neck, is I'm going to tape off around the fret in question with some masking tape. A little piece of tape on either side of it. And I'm just going to get a basic file, smallest one I have, and try to file that high spot down. I'm going to do it all by feel and by eye. I'm going to lift these strings up out of the way. I'm leaving the guitar under tension because I'm lazy. And I'm just going to sort of try and knock this down a little bit. Now the trick is I don't want to go too low in this because then that'll make this one too high. And if I go too low on that, it'll make this one too high. So that's why I'm trying to just very gingerly just take a little bit off. And now I think I might have it, so I'm going to remove the tape. And sort of check it out. Still a little buzz. Alright, I think we're there for this step. The frets have like an arch to them. They're not flat and square. They have like a kind of a radius to the top. And what I just did is I just filed it down flat with a bastard file, so it's no longer radiused. They make all sorts of specialty guitar files, like this one here, that are designed to where you could then run over the file to round it back out again. But you probably don't have one of those. So we're going to use this same file, and we're just going to sort of knock a little off the sides to try and just fake that round shape again. So I'm just doing a slight angle one way, put my hands in the way, then a slight angle the other way. And you can see I'm hitting the tape a little bit, which means I'm going to scratch my fingerboard, so I got to be careful. So I'm just going to try and fake that radius by rounding it over like that, and I think that is going to be okay. Now that I've done that, this is all rough because it's been filed, so I want to sand it through a bunch of grits. I'm going to start at around 400 grit, and you might not have stuff like that. So what I would normally do is I would sand from 400 grit up through 2000, but what I'm going to do right now, assuming that you don't have all that high sandpaper in your shop, I'm going to just do 400 grit. And you don't want to go out and buy a whole ton of it, right? Of course, it would be easier if you took the strings off, but got it a little bit cleaner. Looks actually not bad considering I'm just using 400 grit sandpaper. Now that I've done that, here's the real trick. I don't know if you or your wife or anybody you know does your nails, but if you do, you have one of these floating around. There's a rough side and a smooth side. Do the rough side first. And then the smooth side. And there's your high polish sandpaper. Now look at that shine. It's a little bit flatter than the other ones, but it's not far off for not having the right tools. And if you are really in love with this guitar and you really want to make it play good, take it to a professional luthier that can do a setup on it. He'll have all the right tools and he'll have the skills to really set this up and make it sing. After messing around and filing that fret, I wasn't happy with all of these frets right here. I thought they were all just a wee bit high and I was getting a little bit of unevenness. So I don't want to do an entire fret job on this. I just want to sort of level these frets out a little bit. I'm going to make a couple marks with some Sharpie on them, just like sanding when you use a pencil mark. This is a Skyscraper Guitars fret work tool, filing tool, and it's a precision piece of aluminum that you can stick sandpaper onto. I went and I like to do this with strings on, because you're supposed to, there's all these jigs you can set up to put your neck and make it flat and everything. I just like to do it with the strings on, and that way I can set the tension with the strings on, make it flat with the strings on, so I'm actually simulating what the guitar is like in the real world, not some benchtop simulation of it. So what I did is I took these tools and I cut a slot in them so I can slide them over the strings, and I can actually work on the guitar like that with the strings. Now I'm assuming you don't have that. So instead what I just did now is I took a piece of MDF, the same MDF that my template's made of, and I put a piece of 320 grit sandpaper on there, just a little bit of spray glue, and I'm going to use that. I need to loosen my strings a little bit so I can actually work under here. So slide this piece of wood under. Now I can prop the strings up. You can see there's still a lot of tension. All this stuff I'm doing is to make this guitar really play well. You could also just raise the action a little bit, and sometimes that takes care of it, and you just don't have as low of action. But I'm trying to make this thing play like a pretty pro guitar right now, so I'm going the extra mile. I can use some sort of precision straight edge like my square to sort of check them, see if they look flat. I can look right down the barrel and see if I have a rock right here. That one shouldn't really matter all that much. See that I changed the shapes of the frets a little bit and I flattened them, and I could use my tool that I have that kind of recrowns them. I'm not going to do that though. I'm going to try to use this file to just sort of shape them a little bit. Now it's great. I have no buzzes and everything feels really good. The frets are a little bit flatter up here than I would like because I'm not using the proper fretting tool. But if you have this problem with this guitar where you need to do some of this fret work, you could do it like this and it's going to work fine. You could also take it to a luthier and have them set it up. I've made guitars with, this is probably like my 9th or 10th neck from this same company of this same neck that I've bought. And most of them don't have problems like this, or occasionally there'll be like one fret that's a little off. This is the first time I've had to do several. And honestly, I think I probably was just getting a little carried away. Another thing I've found is that sometimes that one fret that's off will be the fret that is directly lined up with these screws that go into the neck. So when they go in, if they're a little too close, they might push it up and just change the shape of the wood a little bit there. So that's something you could do, is you could actually plan and be a little more careful and aim to shoot between frets when you put these screws in, and that could save you some trouble too. But like I said, most of these necks right out of the box are pretty good. Don't be afraid to pay a luthier. You know, they'd be like probably like less than $100 to get them to do a setup for you when you're done too, if you don't have the tools, or experiment and learn yourself. All right, let's wire this thing up now that we got it set up good.
Wow, that was fast! Congratulations, your guitar is assembled and set up and playing. Now you're ready to wire it up, so go ahead and move on to Chapter 3 on electronics and wiring.